First of all, thanks, Sarah, for getting us started. I think this is like a really good segue into what I'm going to talk about. Her stuff is basically the building blocks, because if you don't have a product and it doesn't work well, it's kind of hard to grow it. So my talk's going to be about growing your startup the easy way. And as she said, yeah, my name's Neil. I'm based kind of all around the world. I work with a remote team. A lot of our team's in Europe, so I'm kind of here for the summer, trying to get to know them a bit better. I'm originally from the United States. So to get you started, my background, I started out as kind of a consultant. I worked for a couple agencies, one being ThoughtBot, a couple others in the Valley. Then I decided to leave consulting, and I started to kind of start startups, get into that scene. I was CTO and co-founder of a site called women.com, which was basically a social network for women. And we took that through Y Combinator back in the summer of 2014. Let's see. And then that's where I met GovPredict. And I ended up transitioning out of my role at women.com and joined GovPredict after doing some more consulting in the Valley. I got to know them. They were also in our Y Combinator batch, so that's how it works. My background is mainly as an engineer. I studied, computer science and kind of did that whole thing. But I found myself getting involved in growth a lot because I see like a lot of companies struggling with it. So that's what we're pretty much going to talk about today, is like how we can, jumpstart growth. And I want to share kind of, my background, my experience, and kind of what I've seen a lot of companies struggle with. Because I see a lot of companies, kind of anything below, maybe 3 or 4 years in business, or, multi-million-dollar yearly revenue, pretty much everyone's struggling with these things. So, if you have a startup and you don't really know like how to grow it, or you don't have any processes implemented, you're probably not alone. Like even a lot of companies in the Bay Area that make press, make headlines, like internally it's just a bunch of people running around in a warehouse in San Francisco. She knows what I'm talking about. So basically it's everyone. Like a lot of startup founders are people who build products like myself. I'm an engineer first and foremost. I have no formal experience on a sales team or doing marketing, but I've kind of picked it up along the way. So if you're kind of a couple years into a startup, you might not have these experiences and kind of understand how to run processes around growth. So I'm going to break my talk down into like 3 parts today. Number 1 is going to be the easy parts. We'll get those out of the way first. Number 2 is going to be the hard parts, which mostly will be left for you guys to figure out on your own. And then number 3 is how to grow. So I'm going to kind of jump into like a little bit of a quick start guide on the various ways to grow your company. So what this is for is kind of people who are trying to figure out like, hey, I have this product or I have this small company, what are kind of the paths to growing it? If you're like a really experienced salesperson, probably the sales advice is going to be a little bit basic for you. Same with marketing, etc. But I hope to kind of cover like a broad swath of the ways of growing a company. So first of all, the easy parts. The easy parts are kind of, I guess it's a little more philosophical, and it's actually really simple. The easy parts are kind of like the core of like what a startup is. So to me, what a startup is one of 2 things. You either die or you grow. It might sound tragic, but it's really not. If you can't find significant enough growth, you're eventually going to die. You might be able to, hold it off because your cousin invested in your company and really believes in you, and you can kind of hold off for a couple years from death. But realistically, if you don't find that path to fast growth, you're not going to make it. So that boils down to a couple goals that you should always be orienting your decisions in a company around. 1 is to prevent dying, and 2 is to promote growth in your company. And I know this is really simple, but a lot of people get really distracted with other things in the startup, like, am I going to look good on my TechCrunch profile photo? Is my Crunchbase like profile filled out right, I think people kind of get into the weeds and forget that there's really only a couple things that matter in a startup, and that's, growing and not dying. So I don't want to, take things for granted. Let's talk about these things a little bit more. So number one, why is growth good? Growth is good because you can make money if that's your thing, and all startups, whether or not it's like a vision-driven or kind of a goal-oriented thing, you have to make money at some point. And another good thing about growth is you can raise investment so you can stay alive for a little bit longer. Growth helps you just kind of generally avoid death of your company and allowing you to achieve those dreams of whatever that end goal you had in mind was. And second of all, why is death bad? Well, because it's kind of the opposite of the things we just talked about, right? You stop making money and your dream is over. Goodbye. So that's kind of the basics. Keep growing and don't die. So I kind of frame all of my decisions like on a weekly and daily basis around it. Like if we're doing something that's, not going to help us grow, we shouldn't be doing it. Also, we should think about, will not doing this thing kill us? And the third thing I like to think about is there something better we can do to achieve one of those first two goals? And again, it sounds very simple, but I think a lot of people forget this, that like everything you should do, like in your day-to-day work, should be something that's going to, either grow your company or avoid it from dying. So those things might be like, hiring a sales rep. Let's say your goals, you're on track for this month, but the next month or two after that, you're not going to hit your goals unless you have extra bandwidth. Well, that's something that can help you grow. Another thing that can help you grow is, building new products. So like she said earlier, prototyping, getting something out to your customers, right? Working on something new that new people are going to buy. Things that aren't growth. Like I said, worrying about press necessarily, might not help you guys. Worrying about kind of the, things like networking events or, giving talks. Maybe I'm a bad example right now. But getting into those kind of distracting things around a startup, or even the kind of day-to-day things that you might not think about as like not growing your company, but, polishing your landing pages. Maybe it doesn't really matter if they're pretty. Maybe you just need to like build more or, test some more. So just kind of focusing on finding the things that are going to make you grow most. And on the next slide, I'm going to get into things that can kill you, because I think that one's a little bit harder to see. But like, as opposed to things that like will make you grow, these aren't things that will make you not grow. They're things that you should like do, because otherwise your startup will die. So these can be pretty detailed or pretty numerous, I guess. So legal problems, co-founder disputes. Forgetting to pay taxes almost killed off one company in a pretty, famous story in the United States. So, making sure you have these things in line is really important. They're not going to make you grow, right? Like, fighting off a lawsuit isn't going to help you grow, but it's going to help your company stay alive and not get, ruled over. And there's some you can't really deal with, but you should have them in mind, like a big company moving in on your market. Like, if Google launches your exact same product, it might kill you, but there's nothing you can do about it probably. So the things that can grow you, I guess, are pretty limited. And I think people kind of think there's this like long list of ways to grow a company, but realistically, this list is pretty short. There are some other things on my list, or on the possibilities list, but I'm kind of focusing on, the most important ones. And so this list is actually originally from an Andrew Chen post, who I really recommend you read. He's has a really, really good blog about growth and breaks it down in simple terms for you. And this is a list that's stuck with me through all of the companies I've consulted for and worked with. And it rings true every time. I really haven't found a company that, falls really outside of this list. It's very infrequent. There's a couple other things like, partnerships or affiliate deals that could maybe make you grow. But again, these are kind of the main ones you want to focus on with your company. So paid acquisition, that's like usually buying ads. So using Adwords, Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, that kind of thing. Basically like giving another company money and they send you users. And then it's your business to close them when they're on their site. And actually when coming up with this list, I couldn't really think of any companies that I could confirm did this as kind of their main growth strategy at the start. And we'll get into that in a little more detail later, but I think there's a good reason for that. But a lot of these companies, even these on the list, like once they get bigger, they end up doing paid acquisition, but that wasn't kind of their initial way of growing. Viral growth is basically like something where you use it and then you tell your friend about it, or you use it and somebody else is forced to use it. So the channels for that can be talking to your friend. It could be share buttons on an article. And actually, I think the biggest companies are usually founded off of viral growth. Just off the top of my head, the largest I could think of, Airbnb, was very much a viral growth pattern, right? People were going and sleeping on somebody's couch, and then they tell their friends, hey, I saved a bunch of money going to this conference because I slept on somebody's airbed. That was the start of it. They were actually using airbeds on people's floors, and it just grew from there. And that's how most people find out about Airbnb. It's now they have ads, but originally it was just kind of like, hey, I went to this city and I got an apartment right away. I didn't have to spend my time in a hotel or something like that. Uber, you're kind of forced to use it. If somebody's ordering you an Uber, you hop in it with them, you automatically learn about it. And obviously these things, like, when they're done right, that's kind of, I think, the most powerful way to grow a company. But it's really hard to get right. And it's also, pretty competitive. Like, these are kind of the biggest companies. Like, if it's something viral, it's something you probably do every day. So it's going to be hard to compete, but if you can do it right, there's a big reward. So the next one is SEO. Also, a lot of companies have grown and made their kind of primary channel SEO. So Google is kind of the lion's share of the market. It's in the 90 percentile of search traffic in the world. Of course, there's a few others like Bing and some other smaller ones, but mainly you're going to be focusing on Google. A couple examples of companies: Quora is one, Stack Overflow is another, TripAdvisor. If you've ever asked like what's going on in Paris or what's going on in London, you'll find a TripAdvisor link. And this is, I think, a really good way to grow whatever whichever company you're growing, and we'll go into more detail on that one as well. Sales, and I'm saying traditional here because a lot of companies will have some level of sales in them, even if it's paid acquisition. You might have a salesperson basically kind of in the middle helping sell you on it. I'm talking kind of more of the traditional sales model where you might have a marketing lead come in, and then you have a salesperson go out and talk to the person, give a demo, that kind of thing. Somebody with a personal touch who's going to go in and sell that for you. And a couple examples: HubSpot, Salesforce, Workday. These are all like companies that sell kind of more expensive business-to-business products where people aren't as willing to part with their money, and need to be convinced why it's going to like help their business. So now let's talk about the hard parts. This is kind of a short list, but it's kind of, I guess, like the core of what you do at any company and what's going to make you successful. So the first one is building something people want, which is the mantra that they imprint on us at Y Combinator, that you should always be building something that people want and want to use. And I was just talking to Valentin earlier today, and he was saying there's a lot of companies that are kind of driven by this vision of the founder and this kind of end goal, but I think the more important thing is to build something that your users are going to want, and something that people are going to buy, not kind of get stuck in this mindset of like, what's your end goal? And also, actually not dying and actually not growing are really hard. This is kind of the day-to-day struggle of a founder and the day-to-day struggle of a team that you have to go through for multiple years on end before you see some good end result. So that's why I say these are the hard parts, and this is where you're going to make it and break it. Like the rest of the things in my talk, you just like have to do at minimum in a startup, and you still might not make it. But doing these hard parts, this is kind of what's going to take you like to the next level, and deliver truly a product that people are going to buy in mass. So now let's talk about how to grow. I'm going to kind of go through our list of things that can grow you, and I'm going to kind of give you like a quick start guide on like kind of the first couple things you should do, and a couple tools that you should use. Obviously, this is a short talk, so I can't go into full depth on every one of them, but hopefully it'll give you like a good start on kind of things to Google and products to use when you're starting to like kickstart growth in your company. So I think first it's good to like develop a framework around what your steps to growing are. So first of all, you really need to understand like, what is growth? What are all the terms? What does my funnel look like? Who are my users? So kind of understanding everything and being able to like know how to implement, kind of the starter guides that I'm going to give you. Without understanding it, it's very hard to like develop processes around it. Number two is to set goals. And this is another thing that I see a lot of companies that I work with that don't really do. They just kind of like, we're like, all right, let's grow, let's get bigger. And like, okay, yes, it's great to get bigger, but how much larger do we want to grow this company? How fast should we do it? And when are we kind of reflecting on those decisions and our growth rates? Are we doing it, weekly, monthly, etc.? And kind of figuring out how to do that. Third is executing a plan. So this is like, implementing a marketing strategy, implementing a sales plan, writing the SEO content, having your developers, deploy these things. And then four is kind of stepping back and assessing, like, did we reach our goals? Did we have a good plan in the first place? Did we even understand what growth is? I think these are all very, very important steps to keep in mind. So first we're going to try to understand kind of the basics around growth before we dive into the further topics. So some terms that you should know in your startup, and not only know what they mean, but I should be able to ask any one of you in the room right now what these terms are, or sorry, what these metrics are in your company, and you should be able to tell me, or you should at least be able to tell me a rough approximation of them. So let's just go through them. So number one and number two, monthly and annual recurring revenue. So that's just the amount of money you make per month or per year. This, I think, for most companies is going to be their most important metric, unless you're maybe kind of a pre-revenue social media company. You're going to want to be tracking these numbers as kind of your key metric. Lifetime value is also a really important one because it determines kind of how much effort and energy and cost we can get into a user. So lifetime value is basically like, how much money a client or a customer is going to pay you over the lifetime of, being with you. Week over week growth, that's, I guess, percentage growth, like from last week. So let's say week number one, you're making $100,000 a year, and week number two, you're making $105,000 a year. 5% growth. You can also calculate that on monthly and yearly. It doesn't really matter. Churn, another important one. Kind of seeing how many people are falling out. So how many people become your customer and then leave you as a customer in whatever given period of time. Customer acquisition cost, that's also very related to the lifetime value. You should be calculating like how much it costs you to get a user. So for example, if you're doing Adwords, you should know how much it costs to get every purchase on your site. And obviously, if that's higher than your lifetime value, you're in a bad position. Weekly and monthly active users, these are really good numbers to know if you are at a kind of pre-revenue company. These are kind of an analog, I would say, to the monthly and annual recurring revenue numbers. So if you're at a company where you're not making money and that's not your goal initially, that's what you should be tracking. So the next question I get a lot is like, a lot of founders don't really know how fast they should be growing their company. It's like, yeah, we want it fast, but what is fast? Is 1%, 2%, 10% a week? Is that fast? And so kind of early and very focused companies that are, making a bit of money but haven't maybe hit their full stride or haven't, hit kind of high market penetration, that should be like 5 to 7% weekly growth. At least that's what Y Combinator recommends we hit during the program in order to like raise a healthy seed round. I don't think that's really sustainable for really long term. I think that's sustainable for like, a couple months or until you hit in the, couple hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. Beyond that, I think it's kind of hard to hit those numbers unless you're like destined to be the next, Uber, Airbnb, Facebook. So, more power to you if you can get those numbers for a year. And then the next slide will show you a little bit closer like why those numbers are hard to hit and, the law of compounding returns, how that, really affects your growth and kind of the rate of growth will slow. For small and medium-sized companies, which I think is like the bulk of the startups, people who have, raised a little bit of money, maybe $500,000 to $2 million, somewhere in there, kind of a seed or maybe a late pre-seed company, but definitely previous to like a Series A. A weekly growth rate that you should maybe be targeting is kind of 3.5 to 5% a week. I think that's like a good number based on, without going into tons of detail, a good number to like get to yourself to the next point, which is, raising an A. And for medium or large companies, luckily there's probably, not a ton of you in the room at this point, a lot of startup founders here. So that one's a little harder to judge because it's really dependent on industry. Like when you're in the early stages, it's kind of easier to say you should achieve this growth, but you don't know, like, you're kind of in the early stages where you're not really hitting, even like a percentage of market penetration in whatever your industry is. But, if you're a large company that's in a small market, well, it's going to be hard to grow unless you're, adding new opportunities and new, business lines. So that's why it's kind of hard to say. So this is a calculator that somebody, a partner at Y Combinator built, and I like to kind of just use it. And first of all, it's kind of fun because you can move around the dots and see how much money you need to raise. You can see your growth rate. So we can see the green line. That is your weekly revenue, and you can see that moving up nicely at a steady 4% increase over the lifetime of the company. And on the axis here we have the dot is where you kind of start your revenue out. That's today. And the red dot above is where you start your weekly expenses. So as you can see, this company is burning a lot of money, $30,000 a week, and is making $3,000 a week. So to get to a point where they're breaking even, assuming they don't increase their costs, they're going to need about $1 million in funding. And then we can see in the top right, and this is kind of why these numbers don't make sense to continue. And this is 4%. Remember, this is lower than what Y Combinator recommends for your time in the batch. They recommend 5 to 7%. So even at 4%, we can see we're going to hit $100 million a year in revenue at year 3.2, which is pretty fast. So, again, if you can keep these rates up for 3 years, I'm very proud of you, and I'd like to join your startup, and I'll be leaving mine. But I think like this kind of guides like also these numbers I said before, where you can see like, okay, I'm a medium-sized company, so perhaps move the weekly revenue up a bit. Do I realistically see hitting well, I think that's year 2. Sorry, it's covered up. I believe that's about year 2 or 1.2. Hitting $30,000 a week from $3,000 a week. Maybe not practical, but this can kind of give you a good way to like look into where your growth is going. So the other thing you need to know is like know your funnel. So where are these people finding out about your company? So is it through marketing leads? So you have maybe press, or you're sending out newsletters, either through postal mail or through email. Are they finding out through friends? Kind of understand that first step. And then how do you move them along the line from knowing about your company, maybe having some vague interest, to being like, okay, yeah, like this is something I want to buy this. Each kind of company is going to be different. There's some self-service models. So those are the kind of sites you don't talk to anyone and you just sign up and you enter your credit card in. For larger purchases, you're going to have a salesperson in the middle of that transaction. And that really varies from company to company. And the last one is, how do you close that deal? So do you have to send a salesperson out? Do you have to, get on the phone and talk to that person, tell them like you have to enter your credit card information now? How do you close that? So knowing your funnel is like really important to kind of guiding these next steps and guiding your growth. So the next step is to set some goals, around growth, like what targets you want to hit. We've already talked a little bit about, realistic growth numbers. So I think setting goals, again, one of those things that I see a lot of, companies that don't do it right. They don't really set goals. They just want to grow. But I think it's important because it can help, influence your decisions. Like next week, what do we work on? Okay, we didn't hit our target. Next month, okay, we still didn't hit our target. Maybe we need to launch a new product. Maybe we need to, talk to our customers more and figure out what they actually want. So I think that's important. So number one in setting goals, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, is picking your most important metrics. So I think generally speaking, this should be, annual or monthly recurring revenue, or monthly or daily active users, depending on your business. Like something like GovPredict, which sells a software product we sell basically a software product to companies with government relations departments, U.S. Congressional Senate offices, basically anyone who keeps in track with government. So this is very much like, a hands-on sales process where we have to, go and meet with our clients in person. No one's gonna, I guess like sign up directly through the site necessarily. We've had a few, but it's generally like kind of the thing you have to go and handhold them through and get them onboarded. So for us, it's definitely annual and monthly recurring revenue, because for us it doesn't matter as much like how many people are using the system, as long as it's like sufficiently good and our clients are engaging. Versus women.com, we were always tracking weekly and monthly active users because we were a social media site. We were pre-revenue, so it's basically there was no revenue to track at the beginning. And then kind of say like, what is the goal for that metric a month? What's the growth rate, and what's our end goal by the end of the week or month? So the one thing I notice a lot is that people get really distracted by fake metrics. So like page views, most of the time that doesn't matter. like especially, the women.com thing, back to that, yeah, we'd get page views, but they were junk sometimes. People would bounce right away, or they would come off of a press hit and they wouldn't sign up. So we only wanted to track people who are logged in, who visited the site and came back. So just try not to get too distracted by building those panels. If you've ever used Kissmetrics or Mixpanel or something like that, you can make all these pretty graphs. Well, there's probably not many graphs that matter, except like one or two column spreadsheet, one the week or the month, and two the revenue or the active users that you have. So try not to get distracted by fake startup metrics. 3, execute a plan. So this is kind of the tedious part, maybe, to the hard and easy parts, but trying to come up with a process that's going to help your company grow. And I'm going to try to give kind of quick start guides, again, hand waving through a little bit of this because we only have so much time here, but hopefully it can give you a start if you aren't really familiar with the categories that we talked about at the beginning. So this will be the same list that we looked at on things that will grow you, the 4 items that were on there. So first, to get out of the way, I'm not going to talk about viral growth because first of all, that one's, I think, really hard because it's much more product oriented. So like to have a thing go viral, it has to be really awesome and has to be something people really want to share with their friends. And that kind of goes into the hard parts that we talked about earlier, where that's just something you're going to have to figure out on your own. And that's why Airbnbs, Ubers, YouTubes, they're not born every day. It's very difficult. Also, I think it's very different from the kind of sales and marketing stuff we're going to talk about. Startup sales guide. So sales is actually one of the things I see startups doing like the worst, because most of it's like an engineer or somebody who worked in product or a designer starting a company. It's not somebody who's like worked on like a boring sales team, and like I don't know if you guys have seen the movie, but the always be closing kind of stuff, the suits and the going into meetings in big companies on like a long table. A lot of us who are doing startups haven't had that experience, so we don't know that like it's actually like anything, kind of easy to break down the process. Maybe not super easy to get right and perfect, but it's something that's been has been around since businesses have been around and has like a pretty well-defined kind of system about it. So my first question to ask is like, should I use sales? And I think companies also get this wrong. I think a lot of startup companies think they need salespeople or think they can have salespeople for very low grossing products. So a $10 a month software as a service product probably can't have traditional salespeople, calling you on the phone, going in and meeting with you for you to shell out $10 a month for 12 months. Like the numbers don't add up. So I generally say like $1,000 roughly US dollars a month, lifetime value is kind of the threshold I see for sales. And again, I'm talking about traditional sales where you like go in and talk to a customer. For like other kind of sales model where you maybe like have kind of somebody on the phone or cold calling, you can probably drop that number a bit lower. But for like a real sales team, I think this is a relatively good threshold. So how do we do sales? Well, first of all, you need a process. So at GovPredict, what that looks like for us is we bring in a lead. We're going to ignore the sources for now. We bring in a lead. First, we want to qualify them. This is kind of the first step in any sales process. We want to figure out if there's somebody who might be a customer. So do they use a competitor's product? Do they have interest in tracking legislation in the United States government? And do they have a budget to pay for it? So that's kind of the first step. Then we're like, okay, we move you on to the demo stage. We say, okay, we'll come in and give a demo to you. see if you like it, or we can do it over the phone. And that's the second step, demo. After the demo, if they still show interest, we take it to a proposal stage, where we basically say, okay, here's, this is what it'll cost you, this is what you're going to get, here are the benefits, and we give them like a formal proposal. After that, it breaks into like a negotiation stage, or kind of final discussion with them. And if they move on from that, they're a closed client. So pretty simple sales process, but again, you have to have a process. Before we implemented a process, it was kind of just, we would send emails and hope things would go all right. But once we streamlined our process, we really hit better growth, first of all, and also a lot more manageable process, because everyone on the sales team, everyone on the development team, everyone in the company really, knew where every client was at, and the salespeople had a lot easier time kind of following that path, because it's, linear. In Salesforce, which I'll talk about in a minute, it takes you, it's like baby steps, like, okay, take a lead from this step to this next step, etc. And again, these things sound very simple, but a lot of people don't do them, and they have, sales processes that kind of loop in and out. And for a startup, you really have to have like a linear, straightforward sales process. So setting monthly goals, and again, this is similar to setting goals before, but this is more of a sales specific one. So this is like setting monthly quotas for salespeople, and sales is different than other jobs. Like salespeople kind of, I don't want to say expect to be fired, but their pay is a lot of times like 50%, salary, 50% commission. So they really have to work for it. So if they're not selling, first of all, you don't want them on board because you're giving them salary for nothing. And second of all, they won't want to be on board because they're not going to be making as much as they think they can make. So obviously you need to do as much as you can to enable them to sell it well. So, that's kind of, everything else in a startup. But, you really need to like kind of assess these people monthly and make sure they're hitting their goals. And if they're not, get them on track. And if they can't hit those goals, well, I'm sure there's other startups where they can sell a lot more for. So the other thing kind of on sales process is like, like removing those bottlenecks to growth. So again, this is kind of everything else you do in a startup, where it's like building product, launching new products, listening to customer feedback. And at GovPredict, we do a lot of stuff kind of in the sales pipeline, development-wise. So if a customer requests something, we'll build it before their demo, and they'll have a new product or a new feature or something that they asked for. And we've seen a really big, like, kind of positive impact. Again, use Salesforce. This is another thing, like, I've been in so many companies where they want to use this like fun, easy tool that has like a prettier interface and doesn't like totally suck to use. Actually, I'll give Salesforce credit. They've been working on it, but generally people do not like working with Salesforce because it's this big, bulky tool, and it's just not fun to work with, like all these like new tech startups that have these fancy interfaces and cool buttons. But everyone in the world who has a product that you'll want to integrate with your sales pipeline has a Salesforce integration. Also, Salesforce just like has everything. So, any other product I've used, we've always, in every company I've worked with, we've always hit a point where we're like, okay, we want Salesforce now. It's like, okay, we want this other like object type, or we want this integration. And there's always a point where we just can't use our old tools anymore effectively. And I think most real salespeople will kind of want this. Like, if you want to hire good salespeople, they're going to look for this. They're going to look for you having a process. They're going to look for you having sales quotas, sales goals. They're going to look for you. They're going to ask, how much are other salespeople closing, per month. They're going to want to know all this before they join so they can predict how well they're going to do. And they're going to want to know that you're using the best tools, right? If we have any developers in the room, if you're still, using SVN, or you're not using, GitHub, Jira, these nice tools, it's going to be something where you're like, I don't know if I want to work for that company because they don't really know like the best practices in my world. So and also use other tools around, and we'll talk about a couple of these right now. So Salesforce, I highly recommend. Again, use Salesforce Inbox too. It's really useful for kind of taking your mails and being able to like send something and then immediately be able to add it to Salesforce, because the kind of old Salesforce pattern and the big complaint was you had to copy and paste everything for email or use some really bad add-on. But this one makes it really, really easy to use. And they also have an awesome mobile app that I recommend. Mailjoy, this is it's a MailChimp for postal campaigns. So it's basically something where you can send out kind of automated newsletters. And the guy working on it is actually a friend of mine from Y Combinator as well. They have built this. We use it. We do direct mailing campaigns to some of our clients. It's proven pretty successful so far. Persist IQ, this is kind of our kind of top level like email tool. So we use this to blast out to hundreds, thousands sometimes of people. And the cool thing about this is it's not just like a fancy mailbird. It actually lets you send follow-up. So if they don't respond within 3 days to your email, it'll automatically send like an annoying follow-up. But we found these like annoying follow-ups to be really, really helpful. So usually we'll do 3 or 4. They recommend 7. We usually do a little less, but we use 3 or 4 follow-ups, and we found a lot of people, they just might be busy the day they get the first 2 emails, and then they are interested, or they're like, I want this sales guy off my back. I need to engage a bit. And then TalkDesk or Tokiko. TalkDesk being a little bit more enterprisey, I would say probably don't do that if you're, a 2-person startup. Tokiko is a little bit easier to use. If you're doing cold calling, these are or have like also like inbound calls. They're really good tools to use. Pretty easy to set up, at least for Tokiko. A little bit less so for TalkDesk. But that's how we hit people up, on the phone. And of course, Google Analytics, Mixpanel, Kissmetrics, these are all great tools for tracking. You should have them. For example, if you have sites you link out to in your Persist IQ campaigns, you want to see, how many people hit them. It's great to kind of track the progress of your sales, goals, that kind of thing. And one thing I like about a lot of these tools is it actually forces you to like use best practices. So Salesforce makes you have, a linear sales process. Persist IQ makes you send follow-up emails to people. And Mailjoy allows you to do kind of custom mailers to people. So you can kind of personalize the messages. So the thing I like about them is it kind of forces you into these patterns that you should be doing anyway, but you might not have thought of. So I think the tools are actually really important. So that's all for sales. Let's talk briefly about SEO. So should you use SEO? I think the biggest mistake people make is that they think every company should do SEO regardless of, competitive of the marketplace, or regardless of if they're going to execute it well. It doesn't work anymore. Maybe it worked in 2000 or 2002 to do, these kind of garbage content that, no one actually wants to read, but they, fill the page with keywords, and they I don't know if you guys know meta tags. If you're a developer, somebody who works with HTML, you will, but they would stuff, the descriptions with all the keywords that they possibly wanted, right? That doesn't work anymore. You actually, generally speaking, have to write good content. So unless you're ready to do that and you have kind of a unique niche to fill, I would say avoid SEO. But if you do have something like, let's say you're in kind of a newer industry like virtual reality, and you are experts in the field, or you have some really interesting things to add, well, that might be, a good thing to write about. So how do we get started with SEO? Well, first you want to come up with a list of keywords that you want to hit. So these should be things that your customers are searching for. So because obviously the end goal of SEO is either, to sell ads on your site, so you get people to come organically and you sell ads, or 2, you push them to a product. So you want to find stuff that your customers will be searching, and 2, you want to write that content. Usually I end up hiring kind of outsourced talent to do this because it's usually been kind of smaller projects. If you're doing an entirely SEO based company, you probably should hire an in-house team to do this. Also, getting link backs is important. Again, warning, don't try to just spam people to link back to your site, because that's against the rules. You could get banned from Google, which would really, that would go back to the list of things that would kill your company, is an SEO company getting shut down by Google. And this does happen. There was a pretty famous case of a company called Rap Genius that would, they sent out kind of messages to get people to link back, and it was against the terms of service. They got penalized by Google. Probably since have recovered, but probably not a good day in that company's history. And then lastly, you want to analyze those metrics. So Moz is a really good tool, as is Google Analytics, to see how many people are hitting your site, what's the bounce rate, how long are they spending, etc. So a couple tools. This one's pretty brief, but there's tons of tools out there, but these are kind of the core ones. So WordPress, or another content management system, is crucial. It just kind of depends on what you're doing. WordPress, I think, is a really easy one to get started. Everyone has used it, or everyone in this room has been on a WordPress site. And the other CMS, you could either build it internally if you have really specific stuff you're doing, or use some other commercial product. Again, I think WordPress is generally the best CMS out there. Moz is a very SEO specific analytics tool, and gives you tools to figure out what keywords you should track, figure out what keywords are working or not working, see the competitiveness of it also. And of course, again, use some kind of on-site tracking tool. So let's talk about paid acquisition. I think this one is not, again, we couldn't come up with any quick examples of startup companies that verifiably use this as their main growth tool, and lasting growth tool. I think it's kind of hard to build a company off of paid acquisition, or at least AdWords and Facebook ads, or at least the biggest companies kind of have other factors in there. They have, sales, they have, SEO, that kind of thing. I think paid acquisition is a really good tool for kickstarting growth, testing out hypotheses. SEO is one of those strategies that's going to probably take a while. Unless you're a really, really successful strategist, it might take months to get your stuff ranked well. Whereas paid acquisition, you can go in tomorrow, tonight, whatever. You can buy ads and start sending people to your site, so you can kind of start verifying hypotheses. So that's kind of what I recommend it for, is to kind of validate or invalidate hypotheses, test out landing pages, that kind of thing, versus a super sustainable growth strategy. And the thing is, it just gets really competitive because, and also very expensive, because the people who've been around using it, some of them are just huge companies that are just buying up stuff even remotely related and don't actually care about return on investment. There's also a lot of medium and small size companies that don't really understand, some of the things we were talking about, which is customer acquisition cost versus lifetime value of a customer. And they just basically buy out ads and don't really know how that's returning. and that inflates the price, as well as like companies who are actually good at it actually get a return, and they just like extremely optimize their keywords and are competing with other companies. This boosts the price of like Adwords and other ad platforms to points where it's kind of hard for you to jump in and get started unless you have extensive experience with this. So the kind of ways to get started with this is choose your platform. I would say the two biggest platforms out there, Google AdWords and Facebook ads. I would say if you're kind of selling a business product, you're probably going to be more on the Google side. If you're selling a consumer product or a physical product, it might be more on the Facebook side. There's no real rule. You should probably test both of them out, but that's generally how I've seen them lean. Then, of course, you need to buy the ads. And when you're buying the ads, make sure you have good places on your site for them to land with tracking already set up. Do some A/B tests. You can see like huge bumps from doing even what you think is like a silly A/B test, changing title. I don't recommend anything as dumb as like button color changes, but you can kind of make or break your startup, I think, with A/B testing. And then, like we were talking about earlier, compare your cost of acquisition to lifetime value, and check these campaigns, like see how they're doing, like actually analyze the numbers. Don't just be one of those startups who either pays an external firm or just dumps money into these without actually tracking. I know startups are busy, so it's hard to do all of these things, but if you really want to grow your company on paid acquisition, you really have to understand, all of the numbers and make sure you're, coming out ahead. So a couple tools we'll go through quickly. You need some kind of platform to pay for your users to come, of course. And then you need some kind of tracking tool. I like Supermetrics. It's this tool that basically allows you to get metrics in like a Google Sheets. It's pretty customizable, pretty easy to use, and a lot of people are using it. And of course, again, always use tracking. So those are kind of the basics. I'm sure there's like 1,000 more tools that you can use for paid acquisition, especially when you get deeper into it. But this is kind of enough to get you like the startup, quick start version of it. So lastly, we're going to think about assessment. Like, how do we judge whether we were successful or not? And it kind of depends, again, on each method you use. But for sales, did we hit our monthly sales goals? For growth in general, did we hit our growth targets on whatever our key metric was? And over the next week or the next month, what can we do to increase that growth number? And I think the last one is important. You have to kind of think a few steps ahead, right? Like, okay, you see 2 months ahead that you need to close, say, 50% more sales or something than you're currently closing. Well, if you're already hitting bottlenecks because your salesman is, sprinting around town in the cold and, coming down with fevers because he's been, just trying to meet with as many people as possible. Well, you need to think a month or two in advance, like whether you need to hire another salesperson and get them in and get them started, versus like, getting to that, hitting that immediate bottleneck and being like, okay, now we need 2 months to hire people. So kind of stepping ahead and strategizing on how you can, avoid those bottlenecks, I think is a really important part of the assessment process. So that's pretty much it. I hope we, went through, a good spread of things. Here's some resources. I'll leave this up for a second if you guys want to take photos. So the first one is How to Scale Growth. That's kind of the kind of main ways of what I spoke about earlier, the SEO, paid acquisition, etc. Also, just go through his whole blog. He has really, really good stuff, and he breaks it down really simply. Like, it's almost kind of like, it's one of those blogs, and I really like it when I get this feeling. It's like, well, that's really simple, or like, I should have known that, or I already knew that, but I never put it into words. And that's what I feel like when I read his stuff. Same with Paul Graham's blog. A lot of it, you just like, you're like, oh, that makes sense. Things that will kill you. He went a bit different direction with things that will kill you, but I think it's also good to read. There's some important terms there. There's just one example of one, but they have a whole Wikipedia page on there. And the growth calculator I mentioned is a link there. So yeah, anyway, thanks. I'm in Berlin until July 2nd. I'd love to get to know more people around here in technology and see how I can be helpful, that kind of thing. So feel free to shoot me an email. Happy to grab coffee or a beer or something. So yeah, thanks. Good luck on you.